Hello everyone, my name is Megan Demos and I am a Suicide Prevention Coalition member.
My name is Scott Hajba. I am a Suicide Coalition member as well, and I'm a suicide loss supporter volunteering for Light After Loss.
My name is Chris Minick. I am also a Suicide Prevention Coalition member, and I am a survivor of suicide loss.
Right, so to start off our interview, we just wanted to say that, or we want to clarify a few things. So first thing is what a suicide loss survivor is. And by that we mean that a suicide loss survivor is someone who has lost a loved one to death by suicide. Before we actually start with our interview, we also want to mention that some of the things that we're talking about are very sensitive subjects. And some of the information might bring up some uncomfortable feelings in you, and that's okay. So first off, we're going to talk with Chris, and we're going to ask him, can you take some time and share with us who it is that you lost that died by suicide?
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you for having me. I lost my dad July 12th of 2012. He was more than just my dad. He was my coach. He was my mentor. He was one of my best friends. I am one of 10 kids. I'm the only male. So obviously we were close. We spent a lot of time together, and there will never be a day when I don't think of him.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, when you first, and feel free, Scott, to kind of jump in at any time if there's any comments you have for the support and stuff that you guys give. But when you first received that news, how did you respond?
When the detective first told me, I couldn't even process it. You know, I really believed that it had to be some kind of a mistake or misunderstanding. I mean, if I had made a list of people that I thought would die by suicide, my dad's name would never be on it. It doesn't matter how extensive the list is, it's just something that I would never have anticipated.
The community around you, how did they respond?
So I'm still in awe by the community's support. We live in a small town. We've lived there for over 40 years. The people in the community are awesome. I was amazed by how many people felt comfortable enough to just, I spent the next couple days at my parents' house, and the people that stopped by unannounced to give their condolences, the amount of food that came through, there was enough food that came through to feed an army. The phone calls and the texts, I had to shut my phone off because it got too overwhelming. The sympathy cards I received, there was too many to count, and calling hours was no different. I mean, we were there for hours just hugging friends and family, and so yeah, the community support was pretty amazing, and it's the memories of that support, I think, that helps sustain me sometimes.
Yeah.
So you feel, my next question was, have you felt like you were supported in coping with your loss? It sounds like you had a lot of support initially. Now over the years, have you felt like you've had continued support with coping with that?
So I do. In the immediate aftermath, I had support from family and friends. I had support from the pastor at our church.
Okay.
I had support from a counselor, and then I had support from my wife and kids. So, and you might be able to talk more on the importance of this, but the day after my dad passed away, my wife called our pastor, and he immediately set up time to meet with me. My wife took me there, we met. Then the next few months, he met with me every Sunday before church with another close friend of mine who's also a mentor. I found a counselor. So he wasn't the first counselor that, but the counselor that I see now, it's 8 years later, I still go to the same guy. He's not the first counselor that I went to. I went through a couple different ones until I found someone that I was comfortable with, and I still go to him. I lay my troubles and my burdens on him. He's been wonderful. You know, we still talk about my dad occasionally, obviously not as much as we used to, but I'm able to put my troubles before him, and he's an unbiased third party. I met with, it would be remiss if I didn't mention my wife and kids, because we talked about this earlier briefly, but I was physically sick for 30 days after my dad passed away. I mean, throwing up sick. And when everybody goes home, my wife and 3 kids were still there, and they hugged me and they let me cry. And when I couldn't walk, they carried me. So, I think that, I know that this tragedy actually brought us closer. And I love them so much. I mean, and just today, my daughter sent me a text and said, you need to send me all the pictures that you have of your dad through email. I don't even know why. She just wants them, so I'm going to put them together and send them. But maybe you can talk more about the value of support.
Well, one, that's amazing. And with the group and the survivors that we work with daily, I can say that's pretty rare, right? So there's a term we've used called suicide island, because there's a lot of times you get support in the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
So the first couple months, the first 6 months, people are stopping over, they're bringing you food, they're asking about you, they're sitting with you, that kind of stuff. After that 6 months or sometimes a year, people don't know what to say or do, so they are uncomfortable, so then they stop kind of coming around because they don't know what to say or do. So for you to have that in your community to respond that way actually just warms my heart, because that is amazing. So, yeah.
Amen.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit. Was there anything or anyone in particular, anything that I guess you didn't mention yet, that was helpful for you?
So I just mentioned my family, so let me talk about them again for just a moment.
Sure.
They still let me grieve. They still let me grieve. It's been a little over 8 years since my dad passed away, and I still have waves of grief that overcome me. And my family knows when it's happening. They can see it on my face. They can see it in my actions. They're still just as understanding and loving and patient as they were before. And it's been 8 years I'm grieving, and I guess I'm on my own pace. That's probably something that you can talk about, but I wanted to just mention again that I'm still supported by them this many years later.
Right.
And they've, like you said, when everybody else goes home and the dust clears, these are the folks that are down in the trenches with me, right?
Yeah, sure.
And they're picking me up. So that probably has been the most important thing, is that I'm still able to grieve. I'm not forced, I'm not getting questions like, why aren't you over this yet?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that is another huge misconception out there, that or part of the stigma that we're trying to kind of get rid of. There is no time frame for your grieving process. Everybody is on their own journey, is kind of what we call it. And I'm a visual guy, so I'm not a clinician. I don't have any degrees or anything like that, and this is just my lived experience. So one of the things on how I envision this, or how I see this in my head, is that Chris is kind of since I am not a loss survivor, I don't know what he's going through. And quite frankly, even if I was, his journey is totally different than mine,
Yep.
right? So Chris and I could actually see the same thing, and I say this all the time, perception is reality. We could see
Yes.
the same thing, but him and I are not going to have the same experience.
Right. Absolutely.
So being visual, just to kind of drive that point home, if I put the number 6 in front of us and I have the 6 facing me, so if I write 6 on this piece of paper right here, and I put this in front of Chris and I ask him what does he see,
I see a 9.
and I see a 6, but we're looking at the exact same image, right? So I also look at Chris's journey as being in the wilderness, is kind of how I envision it, and how he gets through that wilderness is going to be different than how I get through that wilderness, right? And the time frame that it takes him to get through that wilderness is going to be totally different than anybody else, right? So there is no time frame, there is no pace, there is, you go at your own pace, and sometimes you go forward, and like Chris said, there are times where he's overwhelmed, he may take a couple steps back, right? And then he's gonna move forward again. We as supporters just have to be there like your family, which is amazing. Again, I think that is just one of the most heartwarming things. Is just be there for his journey and be there for what he needs whenever he needs it. One of my favorite sayings is love people where they're at.
Oh, that's good.
So I don't, if you're having a good day, I'm gonna love you. If you are struggling and you're triggered and having a bad day, I'm gonna sit next to you, and if you want me to hold your hand, I'll hold your hand. If you need me to, make you something to eat, well, I'll make you something to eat. That's what we do as supporters. We will help you along your journey, no matter how slow you're going or how fast you're going.
Can you take just a minute and talk about the difference between suicide grief and other grief, maybe the trauma, the PTSD that's...
For sure. So again, I'm visual. So there is a difference between supporting somebody that has grief due to loss, and then there's a difference of supporting somebody that has grief associated with trauma. Over 90% of the folks that we deal with, or the loss survivors that we deal with, they have trauma. They see things that you cannot unsee, basically. So suicide loss is different than other losses because those things happen in your house, in your car, and again, you see things that you can't unsee. So it's not just trauma from a sudden loss, like if I lost my mom to cancer, right? That's a sudden loss.
Right.
It's traumatic, but with suicide loss, it's different because a lot of times it's happening in the homes and you're seeing things that you can't unsee.
Okay.
It is no different than being at war or seeing things that are traumatic in nature.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to deal with the trauma part first, right, to then get to the grief part.
Yeah.
So and again, I'm visual. So there's a doctor out there called Dr. Siegel, and he has this hand model. So if you take your hand, and you guys want to do this, we can do this. So if you take your hand, you take your thumb, and you put it inside your palm, and you put your hand over that. This is your brain.
Okay.
Okay? So I'm going to take my other hand and do the same thing. So if this is me in my brain, and I'm talking to my sister, who just is grieving because of our mom died 2 years ago, this is her brain, and she's kind of talking, and we're talking, and she's able to relate and take things in and respond and give me her feedback and take my advice and things like that. Okay, she can comprehend what I'm saying. But somebody with trauma, though, if this is me and I'm talking to somebody with trauma, their brain is lit up like the 4th of July, so their brain is doing this. So I can talk to them, and I can validate their feelings, and I can do all kinds of things, and they're not going to get what I'm saying. So it is different when you deal with somebody with trauma. Typically, it is and it's different for everybody. Some people like to be left alone. Some people like to go on walks. Some people have to just let that trigger moment pass, and then you can deal with the grief.
The why of it is what's so difficult, right? If somebody dies of a heart attack or of cancer or of a car accident, I can pretty easily explain that.
Correct.
But when someone dies of suicide, when my dad passed away, we couldn't explain it.
Right.
We were all at a loss.
Yeah.
You know, nobody really understood. So I think that just creates an additional element that you're trying to deal with, where you're trying to piece this puzzle together and figure it out, when at the end of the day, there's really no logical reason for it, at least coming from the
Right.
perspective of somebody who's
Right.
not suffering from mental illness.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, and there's it's not just one why. There's a lot of whys,
Yeah.
you know, and typically you're not going to get answers to those whys, you know, and that is a very difficult thing to accept in the healing process or in your journey.
Absolutely. I love how you said compared it to the wilderness. That was a very good visual for me.
Thanks.
I mean, it explains it well. I like that.
Yeah, I am very visual. I have to see things because, again, I am not a suicide loss survivor. So, and again, even if I was, my journey is going to be different than
Right.
Chris's or Shannon's or whoever that I'm supporting at that moment. So, I have to see that in my head to then understand kind of what my role is as a supporter.
Right. So Chris, one of the things, so we talked about what was helpful, but one thing that I would like to know, and I'm sure a lot of people out there who have been around someone or have known someone that is a suicide loss survivor, what is it that someone did that you felt was unhelpful? You don't have to obviously tell us who or be too specific,
Well.
but just like even in general. I mean, I know we have discussed this a little bit, but tell us what you feel like is not helpful or was not helpful
Sure.
to you. And of course, things that you say might not be the same for everyone else. Of course, everyone is individual, but for you specifically, what did you feel like was unhelpful?
I have very vivid memories of people asking me how it happened.
That's a pretty common one.
Is it?
Yeah, it is, and as long as you don't mind if I jump in real quick.
No, go ahead.
So,
Go ahead.
and I think if I look at it from, again, this is my lived experience. So, most people don't know what to say, right? And we as humans are built to fix, especially males, right? And I think I can say that because I'm a male. So, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I really think we are built to fix, right? So we don't know what to say, and it's awkward, and it's not an excuse, and I'm not giving anybody the pass, because this is one of my goals and one of my passions is to change how we support suicide loss survivors. So they say these things that are not helpful. How did it happen? Just get over it. It's been 6 months. What are you doing to get over it? You know, we say these things, it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay, right? It's
Right.
not. So we say these things that just don't help, you know, and it's really, for the most part, from talking to people and just other folks, it's really because they don't know what to say. And for me, I guess my advice is really keep it simple. You don't have to say anything.
Can you elaborate a little bit as far as if they're one of those people who feel like they have to say something? What do you feel would be real simple to give someone to say that would be, I mean, my thought would be like, I'm here for you.
Yes, I was just gonna say, I'm here for you, or for me, it's always asking, like, I don't, you should never assume.
Right.
Let's say Chris is a hugger. You mentioned hugging earlier. Your friends, family, people were over, they were hugging you and things like that. I think you should always ask, you should never assume,
Yeah.
right? I'm a hugger, and this has been one of the hardest things for me to learn, is not everybody wants a hug. Even if Chris is a hugger, and I know that about him, if he's triggered or he's grieving at that moment, that could be different than the last time I was with him when he was grieving. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Every situation is different, okay? So for me, I think that you always ask, what can I do to help you? I'm here for you.
Yeah.
You know, you had mentioned, I have it's not a funny ha-ha story, but I have a story about the food. You said you had enough food to feed an army. Shannon tells a story of people bringing here food all the time. And people want to bring food because they want to help,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But as supporters, I think we need to ask what help you need. A dozen people walked by her grass that was knee high,
Mm.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
for me, it's always never assume and ask, how can I help you? What can I do for you today? And typically you're going to get an answer. The other part of it is I want people to know it's okay not to have an answer.
Right.
And if there is no answer, then presence is more powerful than anything. So if I ask Chris, what can I do for you today? Or how can I help you? And he says, I don't know. My response is that is okay. It is okay to not be okay. And it's okay to not know what you need,
Mhm.
right? And then my job at that point is to be there for Chris as long as he needs me. Presence is the most powerful thing.
So that was the toughest.
Yeah.
Friends and family knew, and over time I've grown more accustomed to talking about it, and I've shared it even when people don't ask.
Yeah.
But when the wound was still fresh, it was tough to talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to hug, but I haven't really much this year.
Yeah, me either. It's been a tough one.
I'm just trying to see. So during all this, you talked about some of the support that you got from the community around you and that you went to counseling. Now, did you attend any support groups?
I did. In the beginning, I Googled it. I found some support groups. I went. My wife went with me to some of them.
Yeah.
But it wasn't for me at the time. My wounds were fresh. We were in a room full of people with fresh wounds.
Yep.
And everybody was sharing their story. And I felt horrible for everybody there, knowing that they were as destroyed,
Right.
as emotionally destroyed as I was.
Right.
So I cared about them. The people that run those groups are awesome, and I know that they're the right thing for the right people. But at the time, it wasn't right for me.
Yeah.
I was better one-on-one with a counselor, but I feel like if I went back now, I would be able to offer support, and I think it would be a different experience. But when it first happened, I tried to go that route, and it wasn't a good fit. Like
Right.
the first couple counselors, right? We didn't quite
Yeah.
mesh, so I
Yeah.
had to try different things until I figured out what worked for me.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common. I think it's pretty common with the support group. It is not for everybody. Again, it's your own journey. And I think there's a time element to that. I think there's a healing element to that of when everybody is ready to go to support group. And I think it's interesting, and I'm glad you brought up finding the right counselor, because I think that is huge. I think there has to be a connection with that counselor. So I'm just glad that you were able to find
Yeah.
that counselor. So, and you had enough what's the word I'm looking for? Foresight to actually try a different counselor, like you went to one, to
yes,
keep trying.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people will get frustrated and then just give up.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't
so,
in my
yeah.
nature growing up. I never thought that I would be a person that goes to a counselor
Yeah.
all the time and talks to them. I didn't realize how much value there
Yeah,
really
there
is
is.
there.
Yeah.
To have someone that can guide me through the grief process, give me coping mechanisms, help me set goals, and then give me measuring sticks for my own mental health.
Right.
I still go, and he's created a more balanced life for me.
Right.
Like I mentioned earlier,
That's awesome.
we still talk about my dad, but not near as much.
Right.
But I have a lot of other things in my life, right? I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm an employee, I'm an employer.
Right.
There's a lot of stressors out there, And it really helps having somebody that's unbiased and is trained in the art of giving that proper guidance so I don't
Right.
continue to snowball my mistakes.
Right. Yeah.
So talking about the support, is there anything that you can think of that you would have liked to have been different in the terms of support for yourself?
Our coalition is already doing this, but I would like to see more teams with lost survivors on them that can reach out to families in the immediate aftermath, almost
Yeah.
almost like an AA sponsor,
Yeah.
right? Somebody that can be an ear to listen or a shoulder to cry on, or they can put their arm around you and say, listen, I know exactly how you
Yeah.
feel, and I just want you to know that life is going to be different, but it's still going to be good. You know,
Right.
you are going to heal. You're never going to be exactly the same, but you're going to advance and you're going to make it through this. I feel like maybe I wouldn't have heard all those words at first, but if I had a sponsor that reached out to me occasionally and helped talk me through some of this, I think that would have went a long way.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that, you know, Light After Loss is doing and wants to do more of. You know, we fully believe that suicide loss survivors, supporting suicide loss survivors is one of the keys,
Yeah.
right? Because you have lived it. Now the journeys are different, but you know some of the struggles and some of the pitfalls that you've talked about that you can guide somebody through. You know, you may have made some mistakes along the way, and you can tell a suicide loss survivor that you're supporting so they don't make the same mistake, right? So we provide survivor sacks to all new suicide loss survivors, and there's resources in there and things like that. We have a morning mentor program, so if you've been a suicide loss survivor and you've been in our group for over a year, we will then push you through training to then mentor other suicide loss survivors. So it's pretty cool that you have that vision and you are kind of thinking about that, because that is one of the things that we are doing. So yeah,
Very cool.
Now, how do these suicide loss survivors get this kind of, how do you guys get in touch with them?
so typically they get in touch with us.
Okay.
You know, we're on Facebook, Instagram. You know, the coalition has our information. You know, Stark Mar has our information. NAMI has our information. So a lot of times, if those organizations are finding out about a suicide loss survivor, they then direct them to us.
Okay.
They contact us. We then reach back out to them, find out what they need, what resources they're needing right away. Whether that's meeting them in person, we talk to them over the phone. We do a screening process where we're kind of helping them.
If there's anything that I wanted anybody to know about being a survivor, and the one thing that I mentioned was everyone grieves differently. You know, some folks might be able to get over it in a couple months, you know, some a couple years, some maybe never. I feel like I'm going to be a probably never guy, right? I feel like I'm going to grieve every day, but I know that I'm healing because my grief looks so much different today than it did last week, last month,
Right.
last year. But the one thing that I wanted to say was just to be supportive of the person who's grieving. Let them have bad days. You know, don't try to force them through the grief process at a faster pace than they're emotionally able to go through it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. You know, for me, it goes back to the statement, love people where they're at. I mean, that is like my favorite statement. Love people where they're at, no matter where they're at in their grieving process. So, I mean, I don't know if you want me to wrap up the support part of it.
Sure.
You know, just to kind of go back to what we talked about. I mean, never assume and ask. I think you should always ask what the person needs, and if they don't know, then that's okay, and you just sit with them. I think less is more, so keep it simple. There are no magic words that is going to fix anything, okay? So you can't say anything that's going to fix it. So just keep it simple. Talk less, listen more is kind of one of the things. Validate the person's feelings. I think it is okay to tell Chris that it is okay to not be okay. Because if you don't, and you say, Chris, you should be farther along than you are, or why are you still at this stage, then he starts to think that something's wrong because he's not moving.
Right.
So then that just creates even more anxiety and more stress. So it's okay to not be okay. I think validating people's feelings is huge. And I think the power of presence, just sitting, crying with somebody, just sitting there not saying anything, and that is way harder than you can imagine. There's been times I've sat with Shannon for 2 hours and there has not been a word spoken. And then all of a sudden she'll start talking and kind of letting things out because that's when she's ready to let those things out. So you mentioned patience, and I think we as supporters need to be patient and let the grieving process take its natural, journey with each person, and it's going to be different.
It is. It's a process. There's no definitive timeline, and there's no right or wrong amount of time for how long someone should be able to grieve when they lose somebody that they love.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier about, so we have a saying in our little group that it's not about the applesauce. So, and this is just the, Shannon and myself, basically. So, you had mentioned your family knows when you're kind of grieving, or that when you're triggered, or when you're having a rough day. And I think as supporters, we need to know not to take things personal. I can give you a story of Shannon. It was winter, and we had about an inch of snow, maybe a half inch of snow. And I'm trying to get the snowblower started. I'm trying to get her driveway cleared, and she came out, was upset that the snowblower wasn't going, didn't know why, was very angry. Wasn't taking anything out on me, but you could just tell she was very frustrated, very angry. And I was like, it's just a half inch of snow. It's not a big deal. Like, I'll just get the shovel. Who cares if the snowblower doesn't work? What's your problem? Why is this a big deal? And, she turned and looked at me, started crying, walked into the house, and I'm like, what is going on? And that's when we came up with it's not about the applesauce. She was not mad at me. She was not mad at the snow. It just so happened that the snowblower triggered her it not working because it was always taken care of before. Her husband, Craig, had worked at a lawn and garden center.
Okay.
So all of those things were always taken care of.
Yeah.
Right? So by it not working reminded her that, it just triggered her. So it's not about the applesauce. So really my last thing of advice is really not taking it personal. It's not about the applesauce. So.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So my last question for you, Chris, is what advice would you have for other survivors going through the bereavement process? Is there anything specific that, I know we've kind of hit on a bunch of things.
Sure.
Is there anything specific that you would want to give them as far as advice?
I would say that talk about it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Healing is strange. Some days you're gonna feel okay and you're gonna be doing just fine, and then the next day you're gonna be hurt and you're gonna feel like the wounds are fresh. So it's a process, right? No definitive timeline. Know that when all is said and done, you're going to be okay. Don't be ashamed to ask for help. You don't have to go through this alone. There are people out there that love you and that will help you. Just refuse to quit, right? We're survivors of the unfairness of life. But we have to move forward. We have to push ourselves forward. Life is tough, but you're tougher, I would tell them. So it's Life is different. It's a lot different, but it's still good, and it's still worthy of being lived. So I think the main thing is, before I rambled on, was just to ask for help.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Yeah, and if I could add one thing, I
Sure.
would say, have grace with yourself. Have grace with yourself. I love ask for help for sure, but I definitely think have grace with yourself.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing so much information, great information. I know a lot of it's hard to share, so I really do appreciate it from both aspects. It's good to hear from both sides. And we just want to mention, if there's anybody out there who's struggling, having thoughts of suicide, know that you matter.